On April 4th, 1958, the quiet breaks upstairs in a bedroom where an argument has already burned through every polite exit and keeps circling back to the same threats, the same fear, the same sense that this won't end with someone simply leaving. Police will arrive to find Johnny Stompanato dead from a knife wound, collapsed on the carpet, and the story will instantly become bigger than a crime scene. Hollywood, the underworld, and a teenage girl's name braided together in headlines that move faster than facts. Lana Turner, already a star with a public image built on glamour and an off-screen reputation shaped by tabloids, will be turned into a noir symbol overnight, and her daughter Cheryl Crane will be forced into the center of an adult nightmare. Even before the inquest, the city understands what it has on its hands: a dead mob-connected enforcer, a famous actress, a child holding the last action in a room full of shouting. The case won't be handled like a conventional murder trial because the machinery of California law at the time has a different pipeline for sensational deaths, and the public appetite is already pushing on every door. This is how Los Angeles works in that era. Crime isn't only crime, it's also spectacle, rumor, leverage, and the ongoing war between police narratives and the city's desire to mythologize itself. Stompanato's story doesn't begin in Neon. It begins in Woodstock, Illinois, in an immigrant family that carried old-world roots into Midwestern routines and then got hit by the kind of early tragedy that leaves a permanent tilt in a household. He was born in 1925, and within days his mother died, leaving a father scrambling to rebuild a home that suddenly had grief as a daily resident. The family structure shifts again when his father remarries, and the new wife becomes part of the scaffolding that holds the kids up while they grow into the Depression years. By adolescence, Stompanato is pushed into a more disciplined environment. Military school is presented as a corrective, a shaping tool, the sort of decision adults make when they believe a boy needs boundaries before the world gives him harsher ones. People later describe him as someone who learned early to control what he showed. Not a loud comedian type, more watchful, more measured, a person who could keep his energy packed tight and still fill a room. It's the kind of personality that can read as calm in daylight and dangerous at night, depending on who's watching and what they need to believe. In the versions told later, you can already see two tracks forming, one that could have stayed ordinary, and one that is pulling toward performance, toward being seen, being feared, being talked about. Those tracks don't fully split until wartime. World War II gives young men a uniform and a story, and Stompanato takes both. He joins the US Marines and ends up in the Pacific Theater with the 1st Marine Division's orbit, in the grinding campaigns that turn islands into names that veterans can't hear casually for the rest of their lives. Service records and later accounts place him in brutal combat zones, and then in the post-war occupation chaos that follows victory, when the fighting stops, but the tension doesn't, and the line between soldiering and surviving becomes blurry. After Japan's surrender, Marines are sent to China into a complicated political landscape, and the experience is nothing like the clean, war is over, ending people imagine back home. It's a different kind of uncertainty. The kind that teaches some men that stability is temporary, and control is something you take, not something you're granted. He leaves the Corps in 1946, still young, already carrying the hard credibility of a veteran, and that credibility matters later, because in the underworld, a war record can function like a resume. A guy who's been shot at is assumed to have a certain coldness, a certain reliability under pressure, and even if that assumption is romantic nonsense, criminals love symbols as much as movie studios do. The myth of Marine turned enforcer becomes part of the package. Coming home doesn't automatically mean coming back to a normal life, and Stompanato's post-war years are described as restless. Marriage, fatherhood, short bursts of legitimate work, then the kind of drift that ends with California. Los Angeles in the late 1940s is a city where money is loud, fame is local religion, and organized crime is adapting to a West Coast market that doesn't look like New York or Chicago, but still has the same appetites underneath. Gambling, protection, vice, influence. Mickey Cohen is one of the names that hangs over that landscape. A gangster with a flair for publicity and a knack for turning criminal power into a kind of celebrity. In that world, a bodyguard isn't just security, he's a signal. An announcement that the boss expects trouble and is prepared to answer it fast. Stompanato becomes part of Cohen's circle, described as a close aide and an enforcer, and the association alone is enough to put him in police files and newspaper items even when no conviction lands. Cohen's circle attracts attention because Cohen himself attracts it. He testifies, he fights with authorities, he cultivates an image, and that image creates demand for men who can stand beside him, looking capable. Later photojournalism from the era literally frames Stompanato as Johnny Stomp, the enforcer in the office, close enough to be captured, not as a shadow, but as part of the brand. The daily reality of that role is less glamorous than the legend suggests. A Cohen bodyguard is watching doors, riding in cars, handling messages that can't be written down, making sure the wrong drunk doesn't wander too close, and sometimes being the person sent to apply pressure when pressure is needed. Law enforcement in Los Angeles and the county is running periodic crackdowns meant to clean up the strip, and arrests can be as much about making a statement as about building a case that will hold. Stompanato is described in later summaries as repeatedly arrested and frequently questioned, a familiar face to cops, even if the courts never nail him to a conviction. And that pattern is common in the underworld. The street knows who you are long before a jury does. In official and semi-official characterizations that circulate afterward, he's painted as more than a guard. Someone involved in scams, someone who can move in and out of Hollywood spaces without looking like a thug who wandered in by mistake. That ability matters in Los Angeles, because the city's real power isn't only in backrooms, it's also in restaurants, studio corridors, nightclub booths, and social circles where money and fame trade favors. Cohen understands that, and the men around Cohen learn it too. When a gangster wants proximity to Hollywood, he doesn't send a guy who looks like he belongs only in an alley. He sends someone who can pass at a table. Stompanato, by multiple descriptions, cultivates that in-between identity. He uses aliases, keeps his residence in an upscale area, and leans into the kind of presentation that lets him exist near celebrities without being immediately removed by security. There's a small business front to his life. A gift shop in Westwood Village is described as something he owned and managed, selling items positioned as art while functioning more as a shell of normalcy than a serious retail operation. Side ventures are attached to him in later recountings: cars, jewelry, pets, exactly the kind of scattered legitimate activity that can serve as cover, income, or simply an excuse for cash flow. Around Hollywood, he's described as a gigolo figure, someone who relies on wealthy women and can make a living off charm, intimidation, and the social momentum that comes from being seen with the right person at the right club. None of that requires him to be a movie star. It requires him to be adjacent to stardom, and adjacency is a market in Los Angeles. People in that orbit later describe him as controlled and soft-spoken, not a flashy talker, someone who speaks in short lines and lets posture do the rest. In a city that thrives on performance, that kind of restraint can read as authenticity, and authenticity is seductive, even when it's dangerous. The Cohen world also pulls him into the civic theatre of violence and legal process. A detail that lingers in later accounts is his appearance in a 1949 coroner's inquest connected to Cohen's circle, a reminder that these men are not only fighting in the dark, they're also periodically dragged into bright rooms where they have to answer questions under oath. Inquest culture in mid-century Los Angeles is its own phenomenon, part legal proceeding, part public show, part newspaper gold, and gangsters learn to treat it like another arena where you win by saying as little as possible. Mickey Cohen himself becomes famous for being unhelpful when it suits him, and that posture, stonewalling as performance, gets repeated around him. The city is full of men who believe violence is private until it's not, and then they have to sit in a chair and pretend they're ordinary citizens who happen to know the deceased. This matters later, because when Stompanato dies, that same inquest machinery will spin up again, only this time the cast includes movie royalty and a child. The underworld and Hollywood both understand optics, but in an inquest they don't control the camera. The court does, and the press does, and the crowd does. Enter Lana Turner, a woman whose public image is built on screen magnetism, and whose private life has already been chewed up by fame long before Stompanato ever walks into her world. By the late 1950s, she's not a new face, she's a fixture, a box office force with a history that tabloids treat like serialized entertainment. Her romantic life is widely covered, her marriages and breakups become public property, and her household is not insulated from the consequences of that attention. When she and Stompanato connect, the match is combustible on contact, a celebrity who can't move without being watched, and an underworld man who treats possession as love and intimidation as conversation. In later testimony and retellings, the relationship is described as stormy and violent, defined by jealousy and threats, with Turner portraying him as hyper-possessive, someone who talks about cutting her face, crippling her, killing her, turning fear into a leash. In the atmosphere of 1950s Hollywood, that threat lands with a particular horror, because a woman's face isn't only a body part, it's currency, identity, career, survival. In that era, to threaten a star's face is to threaten her entire life. Turner is overseas filming Another Time, Another Place, and gossip, whether true, exaggerated, or manufactured, starts moving the way it always does when a glamorous actress is paired with a younger co-star. Stompanato's jealousy is described as escalating into action. He shows up, disrupts the set, and the story goes that a handgun appears and Connery disarms him. A humiliation that's both personal and public. British authorities are reported to have sent Stompanato out of the country afterward for weapons violations, and regardless of the precise choreography, what matters is how the incident marks him as someone willing to bring underworld behavior into a place built for make-believe. It also matters because it gives Turner a clear, documented reason to believe the danger is real. If he'll cross an ocean over suspicion, what will he do in a bedroom when she tells him it's over? Years later, the story grows extra branches, rumors about retaliation, whispers that Connery had to be careful afterward. But the core point stays. The relationship doesn't de-escalate, it keeps raising the stakes. Back in Los Angeles, Turner's career is in a strong moment. She's coming off major work, she's nominated, she's moving in formal Hollywood spaces, while also trying to manage a private life that is turning into an emergency. The contradictions stack: award season glamour, photographers, gowns, and then a man at home who wants control and uses fear to get it. Turner later describes a running argument that stretches from travel to home life, with violence that isn't a single event, but a pattern, the kind that trains everyone in the house to listen for footsteps and read moods like weather. Cheryl Crane is 14, old enough to understand danger, but still a child, living inside a home where adult threats can become immediate physical reality. If you want to understand why the inquest testimony hits people so hard, it's because it isn't framed like a mystery novel. It's framed like a mother telling a room full of strangers that she has tried to end something and failed, and now the end is happening anyway. In one of the most repeated parts of the story, Turner describes telling her daughter it's going to be a rough night, preparing her like you would prepare someone for a storm you can already see coming. That detail is haunting because it suggests there was no illusion of safety left in the house, only strategy. The night of April 4th plays out in a narrow corridor between private violence and public consequence. In the reconstructed versions that fit both testimony and common sense, The confrontation builds upstairs, voices rising, movement sharp, the kind of argument where furniture becomes incidental, and the real danger is the person who won't accept an answer. Turner will later say he grabbed her, shook her, cursed her, told her she would obey, and then pushed beyond obedience into threats against her and her child and her mother. Cheryl, hearing it all, does what children sometimes do in households like that. She stops being a child for a few seconds because no one else is stopping the danger. A knife appears, often described as a butcher knife, and then the moment that decides history happens fast, the way real violence usually does, without the dramatic pacing movies pretend is inevitable. Stompanato is stabbed, and within minutes the story is no longer a fight but a death, no longer a boyfriend but a reputed mob associate, no longer a family crisis but the Lana Turner affair, packaged for public consumption. By the time the police are called, the city's narrative machine is already warming up. What follows is one of the most sensational coroner's inquests Los Angeles has ever hosted, the kind of proceeding that becomes a civic event. The hearing room fills with reporters and onlookers because the case sits at the intersection of the things the public can't resist: Hollywood glamour, sex, violence, and organized crime. Mickey Cohen is called early, and his posture is telling. He refuses to even fully identify the deceased in a way that might expose him to accusation. An old gangster instinct delivered in a public forum where every sentence is a potential trap. Turner takes the stand dressed in a way that reads like costume and armor at once. Press descriptions linger on clothing and composure because the city is still treating her as a star even while she's explaining terror. Her testimony becomes the centerpiece. She describes threats to cut her face, threats to kill, the sense of being cornered in her own home, and then the moment the bedroom door opens and Cheryl appears, and everything changes in an instant. The coroner's jury returns a verdict of justifiable homicide quickly, and the speed of that decision becomes its own statement. The system is saying, in effect, that this is what a child did to stop a perceived lethal assault, and that the law will not treat her as a murderer. But even a unanimous verdict doesn't shut off suspicion, because suspicion is part of the fuel that keeps a story like this burning. In the courtroom atmosphere, someone connected to Stompanato protests, insisting he was a gentleman, implying that Turner's version is a lie, and that outburst becomes a second narrative thread, the idea that the wrong person is being blamed. Over time, that alternative theory hardens into a recurring rumor: that Turner herself may have wielded the knife, and that Cheryl took the fall, which is a classic Hollywood inversion, because it recenters the drama on the star and treats the child as a shield. The inquest record and the verdict don't end the argument. They simply establish what the law was willing to say in public. That gap between legal conclusion and public hunger becomes a space where books, articles, and conversations keep returning for decades. For Turner, the inquest is both catastrophe and performance in the harshest sense. She has to narrate her own danger in front of strangers, and the world judges her not only on facts, but on morality, motherhood, and the kind of woman the public wants to believe she is. For Cheryl, the verdict is not an ending at all. It's the beginning of being labelled forever by a single act committed at 14. Stompanato, meanwhile, becomes fixed in the public imagination in a way that real people rarely choose. He is reduced to archetypes: mobster, enforcer, gigolo, playboy, boyfriend, victim, depending on who is telling the story and what they want it to mean. In some accounts, he is a predator who weaponized fear and charm, a man who could move through Hollywood collecting advantages, pushing women, using threats and leverage as routine tools. In other accounts, he is a small-time hood who overreached, a guy who wanted to be bigger than he was, and attached himself to fame to grow his shadow. And in still others, especially the more romanticized gangster narratives, he is portrayed as loyal muscle for Cohen, a tough ex-Marine whose fate is tragic because it happens in a woman's bedroom, rather than in a street war where gangsters are supposed to die. The truth is that Los Angeles doesn't offer clean categories. Men like Stompanato can be multiple things at once: dangerous and insecure, polished and violent, disciplined and reckless, protective for one person and terrifying for another. That complexity is harder to sell than a headline, so headlines win. Cohen's role after the death reinforces how tightly these worlds are intertwined. Even if Hollywood wants to pretend it's separate from the underworld, a gangster paying for a funeral tells you what the real relationships look like. Loyalty, reputation, and obligation are currency, and Cohen doesn't let a public spectacle pass without asserting some control over how his circle is treated. The Mob Museum's historical summary notes Cohen hired Stompanato as a bodyguard and paid for his funeral, which is both a personal act and a public signal. Cohen is telling everyone watching that this man belonged to him, that the death does not erase the connection. In the underworld, funerals aren't only grief, they're also messages, attendance sheets, power displays, proof that a name still means something after the body is gone. And because the death is already a media frenzy, anything Cohen does becomes part of the overall story. Another thread that keeps the mob ties angle alive, even when the legal proceeding is over. In a city that runs on image, Cohen understands that funerals have optics too. There's also the matter of what Stompanato may have been beyond bodyguard work, claims that float through later profiles and summaries. Blackmail materials, compromising photos, recordings, procuring for out-of-town contacts, the kind of accusations that fit an era when studios, fixers, and criminals all circled the same social spaces. Some of these claims are hard to pin down with courtroom clarity, and it's important to say that the absence of conviction is not proof of innocence or guilt. It's often proof of how difficult these worlds are to prosecute when witnesses won't talk and money buys silence. Still, the rumors persist because they fit a recognizable Hollywood logic, that an underworld man close to celebrities might exploit that access, and that celebrities might pay to keep secrets from becoming print. Whether Stompanato was truly running sophisticated schemes or simply benefiting from the aura of danger around him, he clearly understood one thing. Proximity to fame is power, and power can be converted into money, access, and control. The gift shop, the side businesses, the social connections, these can be read as attempts to build a life that looks legitimate on paper while functioning as a platform for something else. That's the Los Angeles hustle in its purest form. Appear harmless, move strategically, and let people project whatever they want onto you until you can use it. The Stompanato Turner story also exposes a harsher truth beneath the glamour. Domestic violence doesn't become less dangerous because the living room is expensive. Turner's testimony frames Stompanato as someone who used threats of mutilation and death as control mechanisms. And the specificity of those threats, especially the focus on her face, tells you this wasn't random anger. It was targeted intimidation aimed at the thing she valued and needed most. Time's later retrospective summary emphasizes the violence of the argument and the sensational nature of the inquest, reflecting how the case entered American pop culture as a kind of cautionary tale about Hollywood excess and the men of ill repute drawn to it. The media framing, then and later, can slip into moral judgment, treating Turner as reckless rather than as a woman in danger, which is a familiar pattern in public cases involving abuse. People want to believe the victim's choices caused the violence, because that belief lets them feel safer. The inquest verdict, however, tells you what the legal system and the jury could accept in that moment. That Cheryl perceived an imminent threat to her mother and acted. That doesn't solve every mystery, but it establishes the core reality that the house was not safe that night. If you zoom out, Stompanato becomes a symbol of a particular post-war American collision. He is a veteran moving through a booming entertainment capital, carrying martial credibility into a civilian world that is hungry for toughness as an accessory. He is a gangster's man who learns to dress for Hollywood and speaks softly enough to stay invited. He is a violent presence in a domestic space that the public imagines as glamorous, forcing people to admit that fame doesn't protect children from fear. And he is also proof that the underworld isn't always a separate, criminal district. Sometimes it's a man in a nice neighborhood with a relationship to a movie star, walking into restaurants where everyone pretends not to recognize him. That's why the story stays alive. It's not only about a stabbing, it's about a city's hidden wiring. Los Angeles can sell you fantasy all day, but its real history includes men like Stompanato, people who treat the line between legitimate and illegitimate as something you step over whenever it benefits you. In the end, the line steps over you.
Johnny Stompanato, also known as Handsome Harry, was a former United States Marine and war hero who became a notorious Hollywood playboy, underworld figure and enforcer for Los Angeles crime boss, Mickey Cohen. John was born in Woodstock, Illinois. Both parents were born in Italy, but were married in Brooklyn. The family moved to Woodstock in 1916. Johnny was the youngest of 4 children. He grew up with 2 older sisters, named Grace and Teresa, and an older brother, Carmine. 6 days after John's birth, his mother died of peritonitis. Johnny's father soon remarried a woman named Verena, who helped his father raise them. In 1940, after Stompanato's freshman year at Woodstock High School, his father sent him to Kemper Military School for Boys in Missouri, from which he graduated at the age of 17. In 1943, he joined the U.S. Marines serving with the 1st Service Battalion, 1st Marine Division. He served in the South Pacific Theater, in Peleliu and Okinawa, and then served in China with the Marines. Stompanato left the Corps in March 1946, being discharged in China. In China, he claimed he ran nightclubs and went bankrupt in the process. Johnny would soon get married and welcome a son into the world. He briefly worked as a bread salesman for a few months before leaving for California. In Los Angeles, Stompanato became a top aide, bodyguard, and enforcer for infamous crime boss Mickey Cohen. He reportedly started off his criminal career as a bagman and driver for Mickey. The pair would become close friends and collaborate in various money-making schemes and scams in Hollywood. Stompanato sometimes went by the alias John Steele and soon became a notorious Los Angeles underworld figure. He resided in an apartment at an exclusive Bel Air address. According to people who knew him, he could be intimidating and was known to be physically and verbally abusive to women, whom he would often use for his personal gain. He owned and managed the Myrtlewood gift shop in Westwood Village, which he reportedly started with money given to him by a woman he was seeing. He sold inexpensive pieces of crude pottery and wood carvings as fine art. The few shoppers who entered the store were either served by a part-time clerk or ignored altogether. Johnny was considered a gigolo, being spotted frequently in public on the arms of beautiful, older women on whom he was financially dependent. He was one of the most popular playboys in Hollywood, and fleecing well-heeled women was his specialty. Singer Frank Sinatra once visited Mickey Cohen at his home and asked him to tell Johnny to stop dating his ex-wife, actress Eva Gardner. Cohen allegedly told him that he never mixed between men and their women and that Sinatra should go back home to his current wife and kids. Authorities characterized Johnny as a notorious pimp, blackmailer, extortionist, and procurer of girls for Cohen's out-of-town contacts. He allegedly ran a sexual extortion ring operated out of Chicago by the Chicago outfit. He was said to keep compromising photos and recordings of Hollywood celebrities he had seduced. He would either sell or use the pictures and videos to blackmail them. He also owned and operated at different times a pet and a jewelry store. He also sold used cars and furniture for extra earnings. Johnny Stompanato was arrested on several occasions but never convicted of a crime. On August 3, 1949, he testified at a coroner's inquest in the shotgun slaying of Mickey Cohen associate Edward Herbert, which was later revealed to have been carried out by Los Angeles crime family mobster Dominic Brooklier. Stompanato was arrested a total of 7 times by law enforcement for charges ranging from vagrancy to armed robbery. He was once arrested on Sunset Strip in possession of a gun and $5,000 cash. Stompanato also aspired to be a Hollywood producer and, according to some reports, appeared in films. In October 1956, he reportedly traveled to Copenhagen, Denmark, where he tried to secure a sales franchise from a Danish manufacturer of dairy equipment. He also reportedly traveled to Sweden, Brussels, and South America for unknown reasons, most likely When Stompanato began dating Lana Turner, he wore a heavy gold link bracelet on his wrist with her name inscribed inside. Lana Turner's daughter, Cheryl Crane, described Johnny in her autobiography. "By picture he looks good," she said. Thick-set, powerfully built and soft-spoken. He talked in short sentences to cover a poor grasp of grammar, and he spoke in a deep baritone voice. With friends, he seldom smiled or laughed out loud, but seemed always coiled, holding himself in. On one occasion, the jealous Stompanato stormed onto a movie set in the United Kingdom and pointed a gun at actor Sean Connery, who was Turner's co-star in the movie, Another Time, Another Place. Connery eventually took the gun from him and forced him off the movie set. Stompanato was deported for this offense, as unlicensed handguns are illegal in the United Kingdom. There were rumors after Stompanato's death that at least one Los Angeles mobster held Connery responsible. The actor allegedly went into hiding for a short time afterward. On April 4, 1958, Stompanato was stabbed to death at Turner's Beverly Hills, California home. Turner's then teenage daughter Cheryl Crane claimed Stompanato had been attacking her mother and that she had stabbed him defending her mother. After being stabbed, Johnny collapsed to the floor, his eyes closed, and he wheezed horribly and died right on the carpet of Lana Turner's new home. Johnny Stompanato was dead at 32 years old. The courts agreed to Crane's allegations, ruling the death to be a justifiable homicide. After the ruling, Stompanato's family sued Turner for $7 million. The case was eventually settled out of court on unknown terms.